Kohelet on ice for a little bit because I haven't finished studying the book yet. I'm in the middle of it. I got like four commentaries I'm working with. So I'm trying to get some other. I know what I think about the book, but I'm trying to see what some people much smarter than me think about the book. So I
Well, there
think we're
aren't that universe is pretty small.
yeah, no. Believe me, it's plenty. So I think we're gonna do Ruth today, and then we'll do Kohelet later on. When it gets really hot and really miserable outside, and the politics get worse, and then we'll do Kohelet. Kohelet's a good depressing book. When you're in the mood
Gee,
for
we don't need
depression.
anything going on that's depressing now, right?
Well, that's the point. I mean, you really need something a little higher than a little happier than that. So, well, good afternoon. It's lunch and learn for Valley of Shalom. It's good to have you guys here. Hope everybody is taking really good care of yourselves and staying cool, staying well, staying taken care. It's been a very interesting couple of weeks, of course. So, what I want to do today, this is a Douglas and I were sharing this, is I want to take a look down at a book, which is benign, and it's purely selfish. I just need something gentle to study today, rather than getting into the heavy duty, deep existentialism of Kohelet. So we're going to take a look at the book of Ruth, which we just read a couple of weeks ago with Shavuos. It's a very short book of the Bible. It's one of the five Megillot. It's the most charming book of the Bible. It does have some edges to it. We'll see that in a moment. But it's certainly the most charming book, certainly of this section of the Bible. It's um, not the kind of controversial, subversive book that we've been reading, Job and I think Esther in a sense, and certainly not as challenging intellectually as Kohelet, but it does have its moments, and I want to take a look at that together. Okay, so let's start with that. Any questions before we get started? Everybody well? Doing okay?
Well,
Okay, you can hear. Okay, so let's get started. So the book of Ruth is one of the five Megillot. The five Megillot are the five scrolls at the end of the Hebrew Bible, part of Ketuvim, and they're called Megillot because they're read in synagogue during holidays on special days. The most famous one is Esther, which is read on Purim. Lamentation, Echa, it's a book about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, is read on Tisha B'Av. Okay, Kohelet, which we're going to read next, is on Sukkot. Of course, Shirashirim, which is a very erotic love poem, is read on Passover because after 7, 8 nights of matzah, who isn't in the mood for love, And then this book, which is called Ruth, is read on Shavuot. And it's read on Shavuot. You'll see why. First of all, it takes place on Shavuot, or like the principal scenes take place at the time of the barley harvest, um, which is when Shavuot is celebrated. And because it is a story about identity, it is a story about what are the boundaries of Jewish identity, who is included and who is not, who is us and who is them, who is our people and who are they, who are those people. And that is the great question of Shavuot. Shavuot is the holiday of the giving of Torah and the accepting of Torah, which is the principal event that defines being Jewish. You have some relationship with an ancient heritage of wisdom that defines you as a Jew. This is a question of who has a relationship and what does it mean to bear that kind of a relationship. And that's the story that we're going to read. And it's charming and sweet, which I think all of us could use a sort of break from all the difficulties. So here's the book in English. This is the JPS translation. Any Bible that you have, you'll find it in the back, way back beyond Job, beyond Psalms, beyond Proverbs, you'll find the book of Ruth. But it's very short, so you can read it really quickly. So we'll get, I think, halfway through it today, maybe a third of the way through it. We'll see how much time it takes. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Nomi. His 2 sons were Machalon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites of Bethlehem. Ephrathite means they lived in the town of Ephrat. Ephrat is a town slightly to the east and south of Jerusalem. It is now again a town. For a long time, it wasn't a Jewish town. It was taken over by the Jordanians. Actually, it was a terrible slaughter there. But in 1967, it was recovered and soon settled, and now it's a huge, huge sort of suburb of Jerusalem. Ephrat of Bethlehem, it's near Bethlehem, in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and they stayed there. They resided there. Opening paragraph, a very simple setting of the book. but the setting of the book contains all kinds of clues about where we're about to go. Let's begin at the beginning again. In the days when the judges ruled. Well, the book of Judges tells the story of that period of time between the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, the conquest of Israel by Joshua, and the division of the land into tribal territories, and 200 years later, the rise of kingship under King Saul, and then most principally under King David. During those 200 years, there was no leader. There was no central core leader. And what happens is you have a story told in the book of Judges of spiritual and political anarchy. Each tribe governed itself. Each tribe had its own elders, its own prophets, its own priests, or Levites rather. And what would happen is that you had a tremendous fluctuation or flexibility or drift, shall we say, in the kind of monotheism that was being celebrated by Jews. And at the same time, you had no central leadership. So much like the 13 colonies of the original American Republic, each tribe thought of itself as independent. And what would happen is we'd have incursions from outside tribes, the Midianites, the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Philistines. These incursions would come and challenge the hegemony of that particular tribe. So the Philistines were attacking from the south and the west, and they came into the territory of Judah and Simon. The Midianites came from the desert. They were nomads that came in from the desert and attacked the tribe of Ephraim. And what would happen is that the tribe would put out an alert, and 4 or 5 other tribes would come together under a charismatic leader who would gather a militia of farmers and turn them into soldiers and go to war against this enemy. And that was the pattern that was repeated over and over and over again during the days of the Judges. The last line of the book of Judges is, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what he damn well pleased. That's really how the book ends. I mean, it's really, so the book of Judges, it turns out to be edited. It's very clear that it's edited by King David's propaganda department, because they took the story of those 200 years and instead of telling it in any other way, and you can imagine how you could have told it, they told it as a polemic on why we need a king. We need a king because without a king, there's spiritual and political anarchy, and we're defenseless against these intrusions from the outside. It's the same thing that Douglas made mention the other night of the Federalist Papers. It's the same thing that the Federalists did when they were discussing why the Constitution should be ratified by the 13 colonies. And they were trying to push back, the Federalists and King David's guys were trying to push back the idea that you have more liberty in a republic made up of 13 colonies, or a kingdom, not a kingdom, but a land, a polity made up of 13 tribes than you do with one central government. Right? That was the enemy. That was the idea. So Judges is a time of anarchy. That's the basic thesis here. And in that time, a very strange thing happens. And it's subtle. So let's take a look at it again. In that time, there was a man of Bethlehem. Now, Bethlehem is a town, as you all know, right outside of Jerusalem, and something famous happened there, but I forgot exactly what it was. And in Bethlehem, but Bethlehem was Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem is where the royal bakeries were, right? In Beit Lechem, which is the place where there's always plenty of bread, there was famine. So this is a world turned upside down. What happens when famine hits? Now, famine hits Israel all the time, because Israel has the same principal geography as California. It is watered by rainfall. When it rains, we eat. When it doesn't rain, well, you stop watering your lawn. All of our lawns turn brown. But in ancient Israel, if it didn't rain, you starved. And what happens? There's a famine. Which happens? A drought and a famine in Beit Lechem. And this man, Elimelech, picks up and takes his family to Moab. Now, that's unlikely on that is strange on 2 counts. Number one, Moab was an enemy. Moab was guilty of one of the crimes. What's the crime? There was an ethic of the desert that when a Bedouin tribe, a nomadic tribe, wandered across the desert and arrived at the boundaries of a settled kingdom, that tribe was permitted to sue for easement, for passage through the kingdom, as long as they promised not to touch anything. And anything they touched, they had to pay for. And that's the way nomadic tribes and settled tribes got along in that part of the world in that moment of history? Well, the Israelites were a nomadic tribe. They were on their way to Canaan. And they came to the boundaries of Moab, and they sued for the possibility, they asked for the possibility of safe passage, of free passage through the country of Moab, promising not to touch anything, and if they did use anything, they'd pay for it. And the Moabites said no, which you don't do. The ethic of the desert is you let people pass through. That's how it works. That's how settled tribes and nomadic tribes got along in that time. But the Moabites said no. And what made them even angrier is that the Moabites are ethnically related to us. They are the descendants of Lot, who was Abraham's nephew, which means they're cousins, right? Strangers treat you well. It's your family that treats you terribly. You ever notice that, right? Strangers talk to you nicely on the phone. It's your family that abuses you. And so Moab, who should have been close to us, becomes an enemy. And the Bible has an imprecation, a curse on Moab, that Moabites are not to be allowed into the people of Israel, and you're not to make friends with Moabites. So where does this people go? This family that needs a place to run during time of famine runs away to, of all places, Moab. Now, there's two other reasons that's odd. Number one, Moab is currently located where currently is located the kingdom of Jordan. So if there's famine in Judah, why would you think there's any bread in Moab? That's the first problem. And the second problem is really a deeper problem. The whole Bible, the whole Torah, for example, is about coming home. The Torah is a coming home story. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. God freed us from there. We wandered across the desert. We came home. The land has a pull on us. The land has a claim on us. The community that lives on that land has a claim on us. So comes along a famine, and this guy picks himself up and leaves. But that was the land that we dreamed about. That was the promised land. That's God's land. That's the land that God gave us. How can you ignore or push away or neglect or deny the claim of the land on the people? But that's who this man is. And his name, he's well named. You'll see, we're going to do a number on the names because all the names are important in this book. His name is Elimelech. Elimelech means my God is king. But I think you have to put the emphasis in that sentence on my. Like my God is king. Like not our God is king. My God is king. That is to say, I'm going to do what I think I should be doing. And I'm not interested in what you think, and I'm not interested in what's good for everyone. I'm going to follow my own opportunities. He is the ultimate opportunist who doesn't have a sense of loyalty or roots in the community that he's abandoning to go and live in Moab, of all places, Moab, a place where Jews are not supposed to go and live. It's sort of like running into an old friend in the supermarket and saying, God, I haven't seen you in so long. Where have you been? He says, well, we actually relocated. I took my family to Libya. And you say, oh, that's great. Jews in Libya? No, but it's a place. Even I said, like, it's just not a place where you go. And you don't go, you stay. And that's the whole question. That's the question that he's dealing with. That's the question that the book is dealing with. And now it names him. His name is Elimelech. His wife's name is Naomi, which means sweetness. And the two sons are Machalon and Chilion. I'll explain their names in a minute. And they run off to the country of Moab. And right away, the Bible tells you what's the cost of this. When you uproot a person from their native soil, uproot them from their native culture, uproot them from their community, what happens? He dies. So Elimelech dies, and Mama, Naomi, is left with two unmarried kids. And you're living in Moab. So there's no B'nai B'rith or AZA or USY in Moab. So you end up marrying Moabite women, which is not allowed according to the Torah. The Torah says that's one of the popular. You're allowed to marry Egyptians, by the way, but not marry Moabites. Why? Because they violated the ethic of the desert. They violated the ethic of hospitality. And these two Moabite women that now become part of the household of Naomi, one is named Orpah and the other is named Ruth, and they lived there 10 years. So a decade goes by. No children. No children, which is kind of strange, right? So living in a land where you have no roots, living in a land where you have no community, living in a land which is a strange land by your own choice, not because you were sent there, exiled there, no children. And then those two, Machalon and Chilion, they also died. Well, that was predictable. That was predictable because the name Machalon comes from the Hebrew word choleh, meaning sick, and the name Chilion comes from the Hebrew word kala, meaning finished. So meet my my sons, death and desolation, right? These are if you ever watch Star Trek, whenever they beam down to the planet's surface, there's always two guys that go with them named Smith and Jones, right? And the captain will say, oh, something moved behind that bush. Smith, Jones, go see it. And if you're an old watcher of Star Trek, you say, no, no, don't go, because then you hear chomp, 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 chomp. Captain, Smith and Jones have been eaten, right? So this is what happens to Machalon and Chilion. So now we're 5 verses into the story, and what have we got? A family that left Judah intact and arrives in Moab, and 10 years go by, and now you have 3 women who are bereft. 3 women who have no place. And what's amazing is that most of all know me, but all 3 of them have no place. Now I want to talk about that for a second. To have no place. You see, in a patriarchal society, a woman is defined by the relationship to the men in her life. She is daughter, then she is wife, then she is mother, and then if she's blessed, she's grandmother and beyond, right? Or mother-in-law. But she has no, if you take away those roles, you take away the role of wife, you take away the role of mother, you take away the role of mother-in-law, she has no standing. She has no place on the social grid. She has no sort of persona in this social perspective. So she doesn't exist in a certain sense. And so she has to go home, because only at home will she have some identity. She will be Elimelech's widow, and that will give her some identity. Plus, it'll give her an income. She has no means of support. So she started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. For in the country of Moab, she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and given them food. Somehow it got to her that the famine was over in Judah. And so she starts going back. But it's not just that the famine's over. It's that at least at home, she is somebody. Here in Moab, where she is a stranger. Here in Moab, where she's nobody's wife, nobody's mom, nobody's grandma, she has no position, no standing. Accompanied by the 2 daughters-in-law, so the 3 women begin to leave. She left the place they've been living and set out on the road back to the land of Judah. Now, one of the wonderful things about the book of Ruth is that it's the most important moments of the book are set at crossroads. At the crossroads. Now, crossroads is a wonderful physical symbol of a decision. You know, if you've ever been at the crossroads, right? You ever had to decide, am I going to go here or am I going to go there? Do I marry the girl or not marry the girl? Do I go to this college or that college or no college, right? Do I take this job or that job? Do I quit the one I'm in and start the new opportunity? And the crossroads in the book of Ruth are always crossroads between 2 choices, a conventional choice and a radical choice. The conventional choice, you can see where it's going to lead you. The conventional choice is predictable. It's controllable. It's rational. It's sensible. It's pragmatic. The radical choice is not pragmatic. It's not sensible. You can't see where it's going to lead you, except you have an intuition that it's the radical choice that will lead you to greatness, that will lead you to something more, some great revelation of truth. Conventional choices very rarely lead you anywhere interesting. They just lead you places you can predict and control and safe. So, you know, the question is, when the kid comes and says to you, I want to drop out of school and go live someplace, you know, do you say yes or no? You always say no. Don't be an idiot. Stay in school, get your degree, get a job, build a house, get married, bring me grandchildren. Kid says, but I want to live a different life. I want to live a radical life. So here we stand at the crossroads. And here Naomi makes her first speech. And the other literary feature of the book of Ruth is that it's full of soliloquies. Soliloquies are when the actor steps forward on the stage and talks to us, the audience, as if they were talking to the character, but they're talking to us directly. Shakespeare was famous for these things, right? To be or not to be, etc. So here's soliloquy number 1. Turn back each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt kindly with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant each of you find security in the house of a husband. So go home. I have nothing to give you. Go home. God will take care of you. God wasn't good to me, but you live here. Go home. That's what you should do. And she kissed them farewell, but they broke into weeping and they said, no, we'll return to you, to your people. Now that language is great. We'll return with you to your people. They don't identify yet with her people. Naomi still is somewhat of a stranger to them. We'll go back to you and your home where you belong. And Naomi replies, no, turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? What have I to offer you? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am old, too old to be married. And even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and bore sons, right? My daughters, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you wait on their account to bar yourselves from marriage? No, my daughters, my lot is far bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. All right, let's go backwards through that speech. Her name is Naomi, which means sweetness. But now my lot is far more bitter than yours. She's tasting bitterness. The hand of the Lord has struck out against me. When a person suffers a terrible catastrophe, they personalize it. All of us do. It's like, why me, God? Why are you doing this to me? We always personalize it. I remember when the earthquake struck in 1994, our house was just a mess. It was destroyed, basically. And we were frantically trying to pack the house to get out of there because the house was going to be destroyed. It would be red tagged. And every few minutes, there would be one of these huge aftershocks. And the kids would look up to heaven and say, shut up. It became personal to them. There was somebody shaking the house, somebody making that horrifying noise. And so Naomi interprets this as God is out to get her. And she doesn't quite know why God is out to get her. Maybe she has an intuition that it's because they ran away from the land. Maybe there was some other sin in their past, but she knows God is out to get her. And so she says, you shouldn't accompany me. I'm no good. I'm bad luck. I'm bad luck. Sorry. I'm bad luck. And so what you end up with is a fascinating response. The Bible has a rule that was common in ancient Near Eastern cultures, that if a man dies before his wife has a child, then she is automatically married to the next closest relative. It should be a brother, but if it's not a brother, it's a next closest relative. And any child of that union is called the son of the dead husband. And the purpose of that is to keep a name alive in the world. So she is Machalon's wife, and Machalon has died. So if Naomi were to marry, she would marry the nearest relative, and the nearest relative would give her a child who would then be known as Ben Machalon. Get it? But the problem is that Naomi doesn't have any more sons. And she says, even if I got married tonight and had a kid, by the time the kid was old enough, you guys be past the age of childbearing. So, this ain't going to work. Go home. Go home. I have nothing to offer you. I have nothing to offer you. And she's talking to them in the language of your interests, what you need. I have nothing to offer you. Okay? And what ends up happening is Orpah takes her up on it, but Ruth does not. And that's where we are now. They broke into weeping again. You remember the tradition there's a tradition in the Jewish faith that if someone comes to convert, you push them away 3 times. This is where it comes from. Because she pushes them away twice. They broke into weeping. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung. And Naomi says to her, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go and follow her. That's the 3rd time. Now, Orpah. What's the name Orpah? Well, first of all, it sounds like what you think it sounds like. Right. So she moves to Chicago and she has a television show and she became very successful. And that's what happened to Orpah. Right. Apparently, I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor that was her name. But it's really hard to say Orpah Winfrey. So they changed it to Oprah. Okay. But the interesting thing is here's where the name really comes from. The name Orpah literally means the nape of the neck. So consider the image for a minute. You have a woman who's wearing a headdress and she's wearing a burqa. So the only part of her skin that is visible to you when she turns around and walks away is the nape of the neck, the back of the neck. And that's why her name is Orpah. She's the one who turned around, went back to Moab, married an orthodontist, joined the Moabite Republican Club, plays golf every Wednesday morning, and lived a nice, conventional, middle-class Republican Moabite life, and was very happy the rest of her life. And maybe when she was a great-grandma, told her kids about her first husband, Chilion. Maybe she told her about a relationship with Naomi, but who knows? Okay, but now comes the greatest soliloquy in the book, right? Ruth says, here's the great soliloquy: do not urge me to leave you or turn back and not follow you. Where you go, I go. Where you live, I live, or lodge, I lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die and be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death departs me from you. And when Naomi saw she was determined to go, they stopped arguing. So they went to Naomi. They went to Bethlehem. Now that speech is such a beautiful speech. It is the greatest speech of, it is the greatest speech of the book, really. And it's the speech of a person who says, I will not abandon you. But it's more than I will not abandon you, because that could have simply say, don't tell me to leave, I'm going with you. But she says more than that. Don't urge me to leave and turn back and not follow you. Where you go, I go. Where you live, I live. That part is her loyalty to Naomi. But it's the next part which is astonishing. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God, and where you die, I'll be buried, which means she's divorcing herself from her own family of origin and becoming part of the family of Naomi. Your people are my people, your God, my God. Now notice the order, by the way. You first join the Jewish people, and then you adopt the loyalty to the Jewish God. You see how that works? You first become part of the family, and then you become part of the faith. That's the way it works. And you live with us. And that's how that's what conversion is all about, okay? That's the first thing that's interesting.
Rabbi, does that suggest she converted?
Yes, but the Bible doesn't have a category of conversion. Remember, identity, when we think of identity, okay? And even today, by the way, Jewish identity is very complicated. Is my identity as a Jew my ethnic origin, the fact that I was born to Jewish parents? Is it cultural, the fact that I grew up and speak a Jewish language and observe Jewish custom in my life? Is it personal, the fact that I identify with the story of the Jewish people as my personal story? Or is it religious, the fact that I worship the God of Israel? Dum, 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 dum. Which is it? Yeah. It's all of those things. Oh. Right. But now you can convert to a faith. You convert to a faith by adopting its worship, its beliefs, its practices, its worship, right? That's how you convert to a faith. Can you convert to a family, to an ethnicity? Can you become an honorary Irishman or a newly born Italian? Can you convert to a culture? Can you ever change cultures? Now, you can learn another culture. You can live in another culture, but are you ever really a citizen of that culture if you haven't been born and raised and nurtured in it? That's the question. And if so, we are Jews who are both cultural and personal and ethnic and religious. What does it mean to convert into the Jewish people? That's the great question of the book. You see? That's why, for example, let's take an example. Anyone here a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law? Now, that's an interesting status, is it not? My in-laws are delicious people that I love very dearly, as much as I love my own parents. I mean, just very special people. And I've known them since I was a kid, because Nina and I have known each other since we were kids, right? But I'm the son-in-law, which means that when they sit at the dinner table and talk about that trip they took a long time ago, I wasn't there. I don't remember that trip. I can't share that conversation with them. They have inside jokes. I can't share those inside jokes. I can learn them and slowly decide, how to, but I'll never be fully conversant with the inner life of that family because it wasn't my family, right? I remember when I married Nina, I used to go and I sit in the den with my shoes on my feet, and we'd watch television. I said to my father-in-law, I said, Herb, would it be okay if I got a glass of milk from the fridge? And he'd say, yeah, sure, go get your own damn glass of milk. And finally he got mad at me and he said, listen, you live here now. Take off your damn shoes and go get your own goddamn glass of milk, right? That was how he expressed his love for me, you see? Because I was afraid to take off my shoes, and I was afraid to go get this isn't my refrigerator. Now, in my mother's house, I would have gotten a glass of milk and taken off my shoes, but it wasn't my mother's house. It was my mother-in-law's house. You see that? So the question is, can you really convert? The Bible doesn't know about conversion. It doesn't know about conversion. You're born into the Jewish people. Only the rabbis 1,000 years later are the ones who are going to invent the whole ritual and rite and power of conversion. The Bible doesn't know about conversion. So what she's saying is, I'm going to come with you to your land. I'm going to adopt your ways. I'm going to adopt your God. I'm going to be part of your people. It's almost adoption. It's adoption more than conversion, right? And that's really what it was. Yeah, Moses' wife was not converted. None of the wives are converted. Joseph's wife was not converted. I mean, so all of these. And by the way, Moses' wife was the daughter of the chief priest of the Midianites. Joseph's wife was the daughter of Potiphar, the steward of the Pharaoh. I mean, so you didn't have, the question of identity was more complicated. But the truth is, it's complicated now. If someone converts to Judaism, they have a hard time being accepted by us.
Isn't this at the time of patriarchal lineage as well?
Yes, it's completely patriarchal, right? So the only way that you can become Jewish, unquote, is to either be born Jewish or to marry a Jew. If you're a woman, you marry the Jew. If you're a man, that doesn't work that way. Okay, that's what the whole story of Dinah is about. Remember, Dinah gets either raped or seduced by the people of Shechem, and the brothers come and say, "Sure, you can be part. You got to circumcise yourselves." Right? There's a steep price to pay to become a member of our tribe, right? And then they slaughtered them, which is even worse, right? The last time the people of Shechem ever trusted the Jews. Stanley, what was your question?
Yeah, are you familiar that Leon Cass and his granddaughter recently wrote a book? They studied the book of Ruth together for over a year after Leon's wife died, her grandmother. They studied together, and then together they wrote this book, and it just came out.
Is it good?
And
you'll tell me if mine's as good as theirs, okay?
What I wanted to say, if it's all right, I would send a link to an interview on that book.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, put it in the chat and send it to the group.
More complete view, a different view.
Please. Okay, good. Douglas.
There's always been some sort of stigma with converting.
Yes.
Rabbi Schulweis, did he kind of break the mold in that with respect to that, or was that before him?
He tried. The stigma was always there.
Right.
Schulweis tried to fight against it. Schulweis tried to push back against it. But all of us, many rabbis have done that, because the problem is this. The problem is the young woman who sits in front of me weeping, and she says to me, Rabbi, I'm the only one at the Seder table who can read the Haggadah in Hebrew. I'm the only one who owns a Bible and has actually studied the story of the Exodus. I'm the only one who knows the order of the Seder, and yet my mother-in-law will not call me Jewish, right? And the reason for that is very simple. Over the generations and generations of Jewish oppression, we developed a defense mechanism. And the defense mechanism is a very, very, very powerful sense of us and them. It's a kind of autoimmune disease, right? It's an immune response, right? Something that doesn't belong gets into your body attacks it with antibodies, right? And the problem is that it doesn't distinguish between benign things and poisonous things. It attacks anything that invades the body. And we developed an us-them, a great us-them response, right? Well, us-them works, except when someone wants to join us. And then we attack them with our us, them antibodies. And you get this beautiful, wonderful soul of a young person or older person who studies Torah, who wants to be part of the Jewish people, who adopts all of our customs, becomes more Jewish than anyone else who's born Jewish. And yet we say, well, she's not exactly Jewish because, us, them. And we have, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but we have an exquisite vocabulary to describe us, them, right? Goyim, Shegitz, Shiksa, Shkotz. I mean, all kinds of, there's a whole vocabulary in Yiddish and Ladino and in Hebrew to describe those people. That is a defense mechanism when you're an oppressed people. The way that you deal with constant oppression so that it doesn't seep in and steal your self-respect is to say, we're civilized, they're barbarians, what do you expect? And that worked for a long time. But then what happens when someone from them wants to become part of us and is really sincere? We attack them with the same antibodies. That's the problem. And that's what Rabbi Shulus was trying to fix.
Given our history of 1,800 years of having the crap kicked out of us,
yeah,
how could anybody that wants to join that, how can it not be with open arms?
Because they are dangerous. And how do you know that they aren't trying to infiltrate and destroy us? And how do you know that they're sincere? And listen, I get this stuff all the time. I mean, I see this stuff all the time. I do spend a serious amount of time working with people converting to Judaism. Every one of them is a joy, an absolute gift to the Jewish people. And yet I get mother-in-laws screaming at me, well, she's not really Jewish. How could you do this? I'm telling you, Douglas, this is the truth. Now you'll see it in the book in the next section. So let's do one more paragraph, then we're going to call it a day because I got to run to a service. Right? So what happens is Nomi shuts up and they go together to Bethlehem. What happens when a person is deeply, deeply, deeply bereft? They wear it on their face. She's only been gone 10 years. Her hair turns different color. Her face is lined. When they arrived in Bethlehem, everybody buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, can this be Naomi? Look at her, my God. Look what's happened to her. You wear the grief on your face. You wear the pain on your face. Don't call me Naomi, which is sweetness. Call me Mara, which is bitterness. For Shaddai, God has made my life bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. What a terrifying statement. I went away with a husband and 2 kids, thinking that we'd be away for a short amount of time, thinking we'd come back ready to celebrate life, and I come back a widow 3 times over. Can you imagine? How can you call me Naomi? How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought such misfortune against me? And this is God doing this to me. So in some sense, I know I deserve it. I just don't know why. That's the Job question again. Why me, God? But somehow this is happening to me because I somehow earned it. I deserved it. Here's Naomi playing the role of Job. And now the narrator jumps in at the very end of the chapter and does something very clever. Naomi returned from the country of Moab. And she returned with her daughter-in-law. And look what happened to this girl's name. She's no longer just Ruth. She's now Ruth the Moabite, Moaviyah, the Moabite, which means what? The Moabite means the outsider, the alien, the pollutant. In Yiddish, the shiksa, which means sheketz. It means somebody who's come to contaminate us. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So let's stop here. They come back, and Naomi is eager to restart something of her life. And she brings Ruth, and now it's Ruth who has no place because she doesn't belong in this Judean society. But she's loyal to Naomi. And the question is, what will happen to Ruth in this? We know what happened to Naomi when she went to Moab. What will happen to Ruth when she comes to Judah? Will it be the same death sentence? Or will something else change? Will something change? Will something happen? And that's the great adventure of this book. All right, let's stop a moment. Any questions, comments, counter sermons?
Quick question. I have been to several Catholic weddings, and that portion of Ruth is always recited. where you go, I shall go. Your God is my God. And I'm sitting there going, gee, he just converted these people.
Well,
You know?
I think they mean a different God, but I love the idea. I mean, the idea is, but see, here's what's interesting, Elise. That was a woman speaking to another woman, which is a relationship that the Catholic Church, to my knowledge, does not sanction. Now, you can put it in the mouth of a woman talking to a man, but that's not what the original context was, right? And the question is, she clung to her. The word is in Hebrew is davek, davka. And the only other place where the word davek or davka is used in the Bible is at the beginning of Genesis, when it says a man leaves his mother and father and clings to his wife. So is the Bible winking at us that this was more of an intimate relationship than just daughter and daughter, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law? Was there
Ew.
something, no, not ew, there's a love relationship. There's something intimate. You don't have to be physical to be intimate. I mean, and that's what's ironic about having the Catholic Church recite that. That's wonderful. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's have a really good week. Take good care of yourselves and stay well. We'll talk to you next week. Stay cool.